What's going on, everyone? I'm James Coleman. I'm with Greg McGarity, and this is the TaxSlayer Gator Bowl Drive to Selection presented by Toyota, where each and every week we go over the previous week of college football and the current week that's coming up as it relates to the TaxSlayer Gator Bowl played in prime time on January 2nd here in Jacksonville, Florida. Currently, Jacksonville, Florida, and the entire state of Florida is trying to not be swept off of the map or turned into Atlantis with all of this rain. For those who are listening to us in the Tampa area, hope you guys are okay, or actually anywhere in Florida, hope you guys are okay and hope you're recovering. But there will be a lot of good college football this weekend to be able to help you. But before we go into that, let's talk about some topics and some different things that are going on. Now, this right here, I believe, and I don't know if you're aware of this, Greg, but I know your opinion would be the foremost expert in my opinion. There's athletic directors and a couple of former execs from Disney are proposing a Power 12 70-team conference. One, in any world would that, obviously money talks, in any world would that ever happen? And two, what would your opinions be on something like that? And would it really have an effect on the current bowl structure?
Well, I think obviously a lot is in the details of what any merger would look like. But, I think for the health of college football, you need to play group teams in the group of five. You need to have as much flexibility as you can, because once you narrow it down, and if you had a super conference or things like that, you would have back-breaking games every week. And so I don't know about that, how that would work in a college environment. I like more flexibility, be able to schedule some in-state schools, help other schools out. The reason you play a lot of the SCS schools are to help them out financially, and to maybe let some others play on your team that are not frontline starters. So I don't know. I would have to see a lot of the details involved in that, but a super conference kind of scares me a little bit because of the lack of flexibility.
Well, kind of some to it. They broke it up and believe into 12 basically regional things. The one I said I hated it because the southeast region just makes absolutely no sense. It's Georgia, Florida, Florida State, Miami, UCF, and somebody about them. I'm like, at any given point, 4 of those teams could be really, really good, and we would be missing out on them. But they kind of try to make it to where you're playing and I think it was a 13-game schedule. You play your conference, and then there's a couple other ones, and then if you have a certain winning record or whatever, you get 7 home games as opposed to 6. It looks like they're trying to take that soccer model and bring it to college football, which is just not going to work. But that's just something as they continue to tweak with the different things, with House coming about and players getting paid basically a salary, which I'm interested to see how that structure will work, and just a lot of different things that are coming to changes. But one of the things I do know, every time there's a change that happens, I hear people say, what's happening to the sport I love? This is ruining college football. I'm not going to watch it. Which, if you're that, cool. You're missing a lot. Even with my alma mater being at the bottom of one of these boards behind us, it's still a very exciting college football season. And let's talk about last weekend, some of those games that happened, and just some of your thoughts. And we can start. I think we got a fewer on the ACC side, so we'll go with ACC first, and we'll start off with the last. Did you watch? Did you stay up to 2:30 in the morning to watch the finish of the Miami Cal game?
No, I had to catch up on it the next day and everything. But to come back from 25 points down really shows a lot of resiliency. But who would have thought that behind Miami, you've got 3 5-win teams in the ACC who are Pitt at 5-0, Duke and SMU at 5-1. Clemson's right behind with 4 wins. Virginia, I mean, there is so much activity in the ACC in the upper echelon that it's going to be a phenomenal year and a race to the finish with some really great games. But Miami did what they had to do to come back and come back again, and for 2 weeks in a row. And will that catch up with them if they keep playing that way? Who knows? But they're undefeated and right now in the top 10, so they've got a lot to be proud of.
The cardiac canes. It's again just Cam Ward. He's an exciting player. It's almost, well, one of the things I was talking to somebody about, can you win the Heisman if you're the reason why your team is having to play these spectacular games? Because he's had 2 really slow starts, bad first halves, but then he cuts it on in the second half. Very reminiscent of, again, don't kill me, Florida State fans, the 2014 FSU team that lost in the college football playoff, the first ever college football playoff. But Jameis Winston seems like he would spot teams and then just because he was bored. But very exciting game. Again, you had to watch it. It looked like it was just over, especially when he threw that pick 6. Going down, and we'll keep going backwards, I guess. Clemson, Florida State. Dabo passes Bobby Bowden for all-time wins in the ACC. And FSU started the youth movement, starting Brock Glenn to try to get a spark. Defensively, Florida State got whooped, and Clemson showed that they are still one of the more dominant teams. Could have scored at will. I personally think Dabo just showed some mercy. But it was a bad game for Florida State.
Yeah. Well, I think the way Clemson has bounced back after the Georgia loss is a testimony to the character and the type of kids that Dabo has on his team. And to win that many games at Clemson certainly is a great record to break, first of all. But I think he's done great things. He's done it his way, which isn't the way a lot of other people do things, but is proving that he's able to build talent and get things happening. And they're really playing well right now. And if the college football season was to end right now, they'd be in the college football playoff right now.
Right. Dabo definitely does things his way. Great recruiting class. They recruit their type of guy, and they're consistent with it, and he does not change. It looks like we're headed to the transfer portal versus the non-transfer portal bowl with Clemson versus Miami in the ACC championship game, which should be exciting. A team that had a start that nobody expected. The Duke Blue Devils were 5-0 going into this game with another team that's come on very, very strong in the beginning of the season, and Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech coming out victorious with that game. What are your thoughts on those 2 teams?
Well, you got a little separation there with Clemson and Miami, I think. But then you've got a lot of teams that are really bunched tightly together. Georgia Tech's really playing well. I know they've had a couple of losses that probably felt like they should have won the game, but they're a strong, physical, fundamental team. And Duke, I know their coach, I don't know how many different players they have from different schools now that have transferred into Duke. It's a very large number. But they've shown the ability to make big plays. And so you got 2 teams that certainly will be in the conversation for our bowl game.
And lastly, Wake Forest, North Carolina State. What are the thoughts about that game? And does that game have that same semblance with NC State kind of coming down a little bit?
Yeah, I think what it does, Wake's going to have a tough road to get 6 wins. And NC State, everybody thought they would be really up in the higher rankings in the ACC, but I think they're 500 right now and really struggling. But we'll see how things work out. But you've got some teams that are already creating some separation, like we mentioned earlier, with 6 or 5 wins, and a team like Virginia with 4 wins. I mean, you've got some teams that really have a chance to really have really successful seasons.
All right, transitioning over to the SEC, and we talked about the ACC's parity. The SEC has some of the top 10, more of the top teams in the nation currently, coming off of a big blockbuster matchup with UGA versus Alabama, and everything that comes into that, playing a top 10, top team, was a top 5 matchup in that game. I think Georgia was number 1. Georgia coming off of a loss like that, emotional on the road, it's important to not let one loss become 2. So what were your thoughts on seeing Georgia versus Auburn and getting it back on track?
Well, I think that game, usually the visiting team has more success than the home team. For the duration, it's the oldest rivalry in the South. But Auburn's always going to play tough defense, and I think they created some issues for Georgia. But Auburn's going to play always tough. They're having a tough year right now at 2-4, but Georgia did not let that loss to Alabama affect them that next game, even though that's all everybody wanted to talk about all week was Georgia's great second half, but still the loss to Alabama. But Kirby was able to get the guys focused. I think his kids are focused. They rebounded well and certainly had a better outcome than Alabama did.
Yeah, now transition and great segue into what you need to do after you get one of those good, hard-fought, emotional wins. Alabama came in and normally when we're saying Alabama did the impossible, it's always positive. But I did something that if you would have told me, like, I wish I were a betting man and I wish I knew the future, because I would have, if you would have told me that this was going to happen, if you would have told me that they were going to cover the spread, that Vanderbilt would cover the spread, I would have put the mortgage on that. What are your thoughts on that, and how does that shape Dober, and what would you as an AD tell a guy like that?
Well, first of all, I think Coach Saban said it best, I think a couple of days before the game or prior to the game, that, you can usually count on a win at Vandy because you're going to control the number of people in the stands. And if you saw that game, I mean, I can't tell you how, probably 80% Alabama fans there. But if you go into games like that just thinking that, the Alabama brand or whatever that brand, all you got to do is show up. It just shows you that crazy things can happen. You give a team like that a little momentum. You had an interception, a pick six that, bounced off a receiver's hands, and things like that kind of can get you going in the wrong direction. And if you're not mentally prepared every week, that's what happens. And so I was a little surprised that Alabama wasn't prepared to play and gave up 40 points to Vanderbilt. You don't see that happen often. I think Vandy's a double-digit. Kentucky's a double-digit favorite over Vanderbilt this weekend. So it kind of tells you the balance. But, Vandy's got a chance to prove themselves to make sure that wasn't a fluke.
Storming the field, field goal post, going 3 miles down the river. Who writes that check? Like, how do you get the goalpost replaced?
Well, actually, it's actually deducted from your disbursements at the end of the year. So you don't really have to write a check.
Okay.
In other words, the conference will deduct that amount from your final disbursement. So instead of, millions and millions of dollars, it'll be lessened by, 6 figures. Okay. So it's not really, you have to write the check. It's just deducted in the final analysis there. So some schools turn that into a fundraising opportunity. Some schools turn it into a situation to where it's a learning experience for fans. It's never healthy to rush the field. You saw what the Tennessee player did to some fans that rushed the field at Arkansas. It's just it's a toxic mixture, because you got kids that are disappointed in the loss. You got fans probably with a night game have had a few drinks, and all of a sudden they're interacting with kids that just lost a game. It's a recipe for disaster. So I'm just surprised more negative things have not happened when you have people that rush the field.
I've been on the good side of that and the bad side of that. Liquor and testosterone are never two good things, and youth. One more game in the SEC before we go into this next week. We have a coach in Heupel who's riding the hype train, and we have a coach that's coaching for his job. Tennessee versus Arkansas. Talk about that.
Well, that was a great game by Sam Pittman and his staff, and especially his defensive staff, because you thought if you're watching the game in the first quarter, they were not able to deliver in the red zone. They had to kick a field goal instead of a touchdown. So you just think of those dynamics to where, boys, Tennessee's down at the half and they played terrible, but they're still within reach. But their perseverance, the way they played defense, the way they forced Tennessee into odd situations there was great for Sam. Again, it shows you that just because you may be the favorite, you may have all the talent in the world, if you don't show up and play at your very best, you're going to have games like that.
Mm-hmm. All right, staying in the SEC, moving to the previous weeks, we have South Carolina versus Alabama. Mm-hmm. We have Mississippi State versus Georgia. Yep. We have, like you just mentioned, Vanderbilt being a double-digit dog to UK at UK. But there are 3 games in there. 2 of them I kind of know to be rivalries. I don't know if Ole Miss versus LSU is a rivalry, but that should be a lot of points scored in that game.
I think that's going to be the most impactful game this weekend, because I think the loser kind of plays themselves on the outside of the college football playoff. They both have 1 loss. They're at LSU at night. I think LSU would probably have to favor them at night, but the loser of that game is going to have a tough time getting back in with 2 losses still with much more football left. So that's going to be a tremendous game from a national standpoint, as well as conference as well, because 2 losses makes it not impossible, just makes it more difficult.
One of these days, I got to make my scouting trip, Death Valley at night.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta go check that out. That's crazy.
Different.
Again, not letting 1 loss become 2.
Right.
And UF, a team that, while a lot of people said that they could just be mailing it in, they're still fighting for bowl eligibility and possibly even more. UF plays Tennessee at Rocky Top, and Rocky Top needs a little bit of payback from last year. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, Florida's won 2 games that they were supposed to win, Mississippi State and UCF, rather convincingly on both of them. So they've got a little mojo going there. Now, how is Tennessee going to respond? To your point, are they going to let 1 loss turn into 2 losses? This game, Florida has always played well in this game. It's been a rivalry. It's not as big a rivalry as it was during the Spurrier and Fulmer days. But these 2 schools know that this game has a huge impact on the conference championship. And I expect to see a great game. And it'll be really interesting to see how Tennessee's kids rebound this week.
And then the Red River rivalry coming to the SEC as opposed to what it's always been. So it should be obviously bigger. Oklahoma hasn't had as much success as Texas has had so far in the SEC, but still with rivalries like this, records get thrown out the window.
Well, Texas, obviously they're going to be in the college football playoff one way or another, but for Oklahoma, it's a much bigger game for them, I think, because they're really going to fight for bowl eligibility. You know, right now the schedule they have down the road is difficult, starting with Texas. So if they want to have a 6 or 7 win season, this game certainly helps them along. But it's going to be a tough road to hoe because I think Texas has all the elements it needs to compete for a national championship. You know, how can Oklahoma's defense hurt Texas on their side of the ball? I think that's really going to be a big thing. And again, how good is Texas defense? We'll find out Saturday.
Well, everybody in the ACC has got a bye week, but so we got 3 basically. We got 3 games though. You got Clemson at Wake Forest, which we should expect to be what it is. Louisville trying to figure it out with Virginia, but the game that everybody should be focused on right now, again, for that second tier teams in the ACC would be Georgia Tech versus North Carolina.
You know, can UNC bounce back? You know, they've had some difficulty, and can Georgia Tech win on the road? That's a big thing to look for. You know, how can Wake Forest, can they keep that level of excitement going after they win against NC State last week against Clemson? But for Louisville and Virginia, that's going to be another game that's going to separate those 2 teams from the others. Louisville coming off a loss to SMU, 2 losses in the SEC. ACC probably knocks them out of the ACC championship game. So a lot on the line for Virginia, and they're at home in Charlottesville. So I'm dependent on Carla Williams to show that directorship as the AD at Virginia to lead them to victory.
Well, I mean, again, a lot of good games out here, especially for those who are interested in the Tax Layer Gator Bowl played in Jacksonville, Florida on January 2nd. But in general, across the nation, college football has never been more exciting. Just when you think you have it figured out, you don't know. We thought we would never see half of the top 10 lose in 1 week. We almost saw 6 in the top 10 lose, but one of those ACC teams in the Miami Hurricanes kept it true, staying undefeated and keeping their playoff hopes alive. But again, as you're preparing for this storm, as you're getting better and you're getting your family into safety, make sure you turn on that tube on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and check out all of the college football games, and then come back to us next week and see how those games affect us here at the Tax Layer Gator Bowl with me and Greg McGarity and the Tax Layer Gator Bowl Drive the Selection presented by Toyota. See you guys next time.